Hey, all, Chuck Mullins here from Quiet Light Brokerage. Today, I wanted to talk to you about how to increase the value of your content business using math and logic. A little background about myself. Started my first internet business when I graduated high school in 96. It was a content site. I've always played in the content space. In college, I got my content site up to peaked about $80,000 a month while in college. So really I've done a lot with content, content membership, content SaaS type products, advertising, kind of all over the board. So um, eventually started looking at buying and selling businesses myself. And then eventually started working with Quiet, helping other people sell businesses. All right. So first we want to talk about the value of the business, right? How does one figure out how much something's worth? And then how do we increase it from there? So usually it's based on a formula, meaning the trailing 12 months seller's discretionary earnings, and we'll talk about that in a bit, times some sort of multiple would equal the list price. Now for content sites, that's usually pretty much straightforward. If you're selling some physical products as well, then you would also add on the landed cost of goods, right? Your inventory. So what is seller's discretionary earnings? Seller's discretionary earnings are the net profits of the business plus add backs, right? And add backs can be things like a single owner's salary, right? So if you were drawing a salary or not drawing a salary, it's kind of handled the same way, meaning your salary is disregarded. If there's two or three of you and you're each putting in 40 hours, then those people's salaries would go against the profit. But if it's a single owner, or one of three, a single owner's profit or salary would be added back into what's the seller's discretionary earnings. Additionally, things like a cell phone bill, if you've got like a loan from an SBA or something, the interest for the loan would be added back. So anything that's not really part of the core business, but it's more of like discretionary. So again, some additional things would be like a car, um, personal development. And personal development would be like if you're in a mastermind group, or maybe you go to a conference like this, and this conference is to learn, to improve yourself, right? As opposed to like an industry conference where you're going to try and find clients or something like that. That'd be different because you got to look at it as what does the owner of the business uh, need to do to keep running a business, right? So if I were to sell this business, what would that owner need to do? Well, he wouldn't necessarily need to be in a mastermind group. They may want to, they may not, but that's kind of a discretionary thing. So now what is the business typically worth, right? So what are those ranges that come in? And we've got it kind of segmented here by two different things, right? So businesses that have less than $1 million of seller discretionary earnings and businesses that have more. The larger it is, you've got bigger players that come in and those guys are willing to pay more if higher multiples. The smaller it is, the less. If you're making, let's say, $100,000 per year, it's kind of like more of a job. If you're putting in kind of, 40 hours, it'd be more of a job, right? So people have to think about like where they're going to invest their money. And let's say it was a three times multiple, 100,000, right? It'd be 300,000. So do I want to buy myself a job for 300,000, or would I rather put that 300,000 into the stock market and then have a job that's paying 100, 150,000, right? So you got to look at that. But as that business grows and as it starts making more money, all of a sudden now you can start hiring on employees. You can do all these other things that make it more like what traditionally would be considered, a real business. Once you get up to where it's netting over $1 million, it changes kind of the buyer pool. That's when private equity starts rolling in, and those are the guys that pay a little bit more. When you get about 2 million in seller discretionary earnings, that's when most of the private equity starts rolling in, and those multiples can start getting pushed up. Again, we say here, 1.5 to 4x. Really, it could be zero, right? If it's not worth anything. But that's kind of the typical range that we see. And then again, for the larger ones, 2.5 to 6x. Really depends on a number of factors, and we can talk about that. So when we talk about valuation, we break it down into four key pillars of what makes up the value of the business. The first one is risk, second is growth, third is transferability, and the fourth is documentation. So what's pillar one? Pillar one is risk, right? You got to think about it like this, right? The value is the inverse of risk, right? So as risk goes up, value goes down. Or as risk goes down, value goes up. So what does that mean, right? So why do different types of investments bring in different types of returns, right? So if you look at like maybe a CD at a bank has virtually zero risk, right? And that means you're going to get virtually no return, right? So, at the peak of CDs, you might be able to get 1% or 2%. Right now, it's sub 1%. Um, and it's because there's no risk involved, right? And then you look at like housing and then stock market, and these things start paying out a higher and higher return potentially. And then you look at businesses, right? And let's just say the average for a business is like 3 to 4x multiple. That means if I made 100 grand, the business is worth 300 to 400,000, meaning it's going to pay a 25 to 33% return, right? So when you're thinking about um, investing, right? Like those are seen as fairly risky investments. Additionally, you're having to put your time in and all these other things, right? So as you can reduce that risk, people are going to be willing to pay more for it because it's less risky to them and they're willing to take a lower return on that. So what are some of the risk factors? Age is one of the number one risk factors, right? Especially for a content site. Personally, if I were to see a content site and let's say you ramped it up and you're making $1 million, it only took 1 year to do that. Like, what did you do to to do that, right? Like um, that would be very impressive to be able to do that. And the question is that sustainable? Somebody's going to see that as pretty risky. With different types of businesses, people have different requirements for the age. Generally, it's kind of like the minimum people want to see is 2 to 3 years. But on a content site, people tend to want to see older content sites, right? 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. The longer, the better, because they're going to be able to look at kind of that historic, uh, the way the business has performed historically. Um, the older, the more established the business, it's the perception of less risk, right? They can look at Google and see the updates and look at your traffic and your analytics and say, okay, look, this algorithm update happened and no, it didn't dip. Look, it went up, right? Or this one happened and oh, it did get hit. What was that algorithm update about? Oh, it was about dupe content. Okay, well, then maybe there was a problem with their content, right? So the longer the history, the more they can see those things and the more they can analyze the business and determine if they think it's risky or not. They're also going to be doing an analysis, right? Especially on a younger business where maybe it's 2 years old, right? They're going to be thinking, well, okay, if this guy wants 500,000, this lady wants $2 million. What would it take me to duplicate this site, right? So buying versus building. Um, they're going to weigh that option, right? And if it doesn't make sense because there's not enough there, they're just going to either just move on and not do anything, or potentially, um, build something like that themselves. The number two kind of component in risk would be defensibility, right? So is your content unique, right? So do you have copyrights, both text and images, right? Are you stealing a bunch of images from somebody? If you are, that's going to be a problem, right? So you want to be using, images that you sourced properly. Is the content evergreen? Is it not evergreen? So if I'm building out content and it's date specific, well, that means I'm always going to have to be building out new content, right? Whereas when you build evergreen content, you do it once, maybe update it every once in a while, but it's evergreen, right? It's going to be there for the long run, and it's not something where it's date specific. The date happened and moved on. So these are all different things that are going to help defend it, meaning it can be around for longer, but also it lowers the risk and kind of the involvement of time and whatnot. The greater the content, the greater the defensibility, right? What does your backlink profile look like? Is it clean, natural looking? Are you doing anything sketchy? Have you built up a backlink profile over 10, 15 years, right? Which would make it very difficult for somebody else to come in from day one and to try to replicate that, right? Because it's just going to take time for that to build. What about your kind of the legal stuff on your website? Get your privacy, get your GDPR. Are you ADA compliant? We've been seeing a lot of people getting hit with the ADA stuff lately. Kind of these lawsuits that come out and say, oh, I had a blind person that couldn't use your site, and then they hold you hostage and tell you they're going to sue you if you don't give them X dollars. So you want to make sure that all these things are taken care of before you think about selling the business. You really want to build a moat around it so that it's not easily replicatable, right? Because if somebody can replicate it, right? Remember, buy versus build. Why am I going to give you $2 million if I can spend 200,000 and rebuild it myself? Additionally, risk with diversification, right? So kind of the difference with a content site that's, let's say, 100% organic, right? You're cruising along, making all this money, and then all of a sudden there's a Google update and your traffic goes to zero. Well, then all of a sudden, if you're ad based, that revenue goes to zero. Then what? Right? It went to zero. Whereas if you've got diverse traffic, right? Maybe you're getting some from Pinterest, maybe you're getting from, Facebook, email traffic, paid traffic, right? Direct traffic. All of these things can help with that mix. Where if somebody pulls the rug out on one traffic channel, it doesn't destroy the entire business. Additionally, you want multiple revenue streams, right? Because again, if you're display based monetization versus say like a subscription, right? Somebody's paying you $20 a month to subscribe to your business, right? The membership or something like that. And your traffic goes away. Well, you still got that base of clients and it's going to be a softer landing, right? Traffic goes away, ad based, you go to zero, right? But with membership, traffic goes away. You're not adding on new customers necessarily, but you still got those guys who are just kind of recurring billing and you've got like, a runway to try and turn things around. So the more things you can do to diversify both your traffic and your revenue streams, the better off you're going to be and the less risky it's going to be, which means higher value, right? If you're selling products, it could be vendors. You get a single vendor or supplier, that could be risky. If you've got a single SKU, that could be risky, right? Having multiple SKUs would generally be helpful. All right. So pillar two is growth, right? Kind of breaking this down into three things. So timing, right? When's the best time to sell a business, right? The best time to sell is when you're seeing positive growth trends, right? And the worst time to sell is obviously when you're seeing a negative growth trend. And the negative really hurts. So if you're starting to see some negative stuff, you got to sell super fast unless you'll be able to turn it around. Because not only does the negative hurt your profit, right? Maybe you're making 200,000 and now with the negative trend, your trailing 12 months is 190. The next month it's 180. The next month is 170. Next month is 160. Like that negative trend line hurts when you're multiplying it by say a 3 times multiple. But when the trend line is negative, it's not a 3 times multiple anymore. Now it's a 1.5 times multiple, right? And the more the trend is heading downward, the worse your multiple is going to be unless there's some kind of identifiable easy fix that somebody can do. And then you should probably just go ahead and do it yourself. But again, they're not looking at January versus February versus March versus April. They're looking at May versus May, right? Versus May. So it's okay to have the ups and downs of seasonality if it is in fact seasonality. Buyers would obviously like to take over the business, pre-season, meaning, if summer's your big time, then they're probably going to want to buy the business. Ideally for them would be, winter, spring, right before you have your big spike. It doesn't really matter that much. People will buy it if it's a good business, regardless of the time, unless it's something like maybe a Halloween business, right? Where you just got this huge spike, in October. Then it becomes very difficult to sell a business that's that seasonal, say in November, December, right? Because, if I'm going to spend $1 million to buy this business and now I've got to wait 9, 10 months to make any money, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Then they're definitely going to want to buy it, kind of pre season. So those are a little bit more difficult. All right. So the next one is growth opportunities. Most buyers want to buy a growing business, right? Will they buy it when it's going down? Sure, they will, right? But they're going to pay a lower multiple and they're going to buy it because they see opportunity, but they're not going to pay for that opportunity they see. So buyers don't pay for the opportunity. Like we'll adjust the multiple if there's just a crazy amount of opportunity. So they don't really pay for it though, but they require it, right? They're always looking at the trailing 12 months and putting a multiple on that, but then it needs to have some kind of growth path. So one of the things I tell people is like, when you're thinking of an idea, make sure you're keeping a list of all your ideas of how you could grow the business. Even if it's something stupid, right? You got a list of 100 things that you're never going to do, but that way you have something to present to somebody. You wouldn't believe the number of times that like people have like what I would consider pretty lame ideas for a growth thing. And the buyer like latches onto that. It's like, that's an amazing idea. I've got to try this. Gets them excited about it, right? And again, people don't want to buy flat declining businesses. They generally want to buy something where they see some opportunity to grow it. Now, if you see some opportunities, you should probably implement them, at least the easy ones, right? And remember, Like the time to implement opportunity is 12 months before you sell. Because let's say you made $100,000 last year and this month. But this year you made $110,000, right? There's a $10,000 delta. Now the $10,000 delta times a three times multiple means that extra month that you waited made you an extra 30 grand in value, right? And if next month, is instead of being 100, it's 110 again, that's another $30,000 in value. And each time that happens, that's another 30 or 40 or how much ever in value. So what people often think of when they're selling their business is that it's like selling a house, right? And it's not like selling a house. When you sell a house, what's the last thing you do before you sell it? You paint the walls, you fix the broken light switch that's been broken forever. You put some fresh mulch, some flowers, all these things to beautify it. That's not what you do when you're selling a business, right? Because if I do those things, I'm fixing, like, let's say I fix that broken light switch and it makes me extra 10 grand. Well, that's great. I made an extra 10 grand, but it's only for 1 month, right? That 10 grand is worth $30,000. If I wait 12 months for that, that's 120,000 times three, which is $360,000 in extra value, right? So the time to implement the growth things is, a year before you're ready to sell, maybe 6 months, right? But don't remove opportunity from the business 3 months before you sell it, because oftentimes that opportunity will be worth more undone, because there's risk involved with doing the opportunity, and if you take that opportunity off the table, um, it may not pay off for you, right? So some other examples would be, let's say you do a site redesign, right? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but like when I'm looking to buy a business, I want to buy something that's ugly. I want to buy something where I'm like, that thing made how much money? Wow, I could do this, I could do that, I can change these things, I can, like come up with all these ideas of things I can do, right? But if you've removed that opportunity and you didn't actually capture the value because either it didn't pay off or you just did it 2 months ago, you've kind of hurt the value of the business, right? So really think about and make that list of opportunity items, and then actually implement those things well in advance of selling the business, right? Don't go painting the house the day before you sell it, because it doesn't work like that with businesses. All right, so transferability is the next one. So if you can't transfer a business, you can't sell a business, right? Somebody has to be able to take that business and be able to run with it, right? And they usually want to run with it like on day one. So are there special requirements, right? So on content sites, something we see a lot is like the person who owns it, like that's their face, right? Their personality is the site. If that's the case, it makes it difficult to sell. The buyer is either going to want you to come on and work with them long term, uh, or something like that, right? So like, how do you sell a business when the business is you? It becomes very difficult. So something I tell people is start transitioning away, right? Like think long term. You don't have to sell today, right? Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 3 years. Maybe do like a caricature of yourself, right? You can still use your name. This is Sally's blog, but Sally doesn't have to literally be you, right? It could be you, just not like pictures of you. It could be some sort of a persona or something of you that is transferable with the business, right? It's going to make it a lot easier to sell. So again, can somebody take over this business and run with it from day one? Is there some sort of technical knowledge or personal talents that you have, right? Are you a chef? And while your face isn't on there, your cooking skills are, right? It's like a thing. Like, can you hire people to do that for you? And if you can, you should probably do that before you think about selling it. Because again, transition is a difficult part and it's very important for the value of the business. If somebody is like concerned that it won't transfer well, then it's going to be more difficult to find a buyer who's willing to do it. Are there licensing requirements, right? Are you giving medical advice, right? Are you a doctor? Are you a nurse? Is there something about what you're doing that requires something specific that would make it hard to transfer? Staff and contractors, right? Human capital is really important when it comes to selling a business. Do you have employees, contractors working on just this business? Are they working on multiple businesses? Um, if you've got three businesses and you've got that same person working on all three and you want to sell this one, how critical is that person to this business, right? Are they kind of like a single point of failure? that without them, the business doesn't continue to run. Again, buyers are buying the human capital as well as the actual business. So it's going to be really important to kind of think about that, and maybe be willing to let that employee go, even if they're working in your other businesses. Make them full time 3 6 months, before you go to sell the business. Make sure that they're kind of well rounded in things, if it makes sense to be, and then be willing to let them go with the business. Create standard operating procedures, right? So when you're transferring the business, how are things done? Um, one of the things I like to use, or I tell people to use a lot, is like Loom, right? Just record little videos of how you do things. It's often easier to record a video than it is to try to like actually write it, right? Because it's like, okay, click on the top left thing, click on the bottom right. Now, as opposed to just moving a mouse around and showing them what to do. Okay, here's how I go about my content process, right? Um, you can also do, there's plenty of different software out there to help create SOPs. I'd highly recommend that you look into that. Relationships and third-party accounts, they're going to need to transfer, right? So again, relationships, right? If you've got like vendors, employees, anything like that will need to transfer with the business. Third-party accounts, maybe, if it's an affiliate account, if you've got an Ad Thrive or account, and what's the other one? Mediavine. I think Mediavine had changed some of the requirements recently, and you could have, I think you used to be able to have like, one site, and then you could add on some additionals that didn't have to meet certain requirements. And I think they increased those, but some of those people are still, still have those. And if you're trying to sell one of those and you're getting paid 2 or 3x because you're with Mediavine or Ad Thrive than you were on AdSense, and somebody else buys that and they're not able to, get that Mediavine account, well, they're not going to want to buy it, right? Because that's going to be a critical part to transferring the business, is that the revenue is going to need to be where it was when you were running it, right? Because they're paying it based on the trailing 12 months of profit. And if that profit's no longer there, they're not going to pay you for that. So really think about kind of all the third-party accounts. Make sure that they're going to be transferable in some way. When you're selling a business, you may say, oh, well, they're just buying my business, so they'll just take over the account. Not necessarily. Most buyers aren't actually buying your business. They're buying the assets of the business, right? So what that means is they're going to set up a new corporation, and they're going to buy your domain. They're going to buy all your accounts. They're going to buy all your people and all this and stick it into that new corporation. You'll maintain that old corporation. And the reason they do that is usually risk, right? If you didn't file your tax returns properly, if you did some stuff that was sketchy, they don't want to take on that liability of buying the actual corporation. That's why they'll set up a new one, buy the assets, move the assets into the new corporation. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant, right? So don't take, listen to them and take advice from them when it comes to doing things like that, as far as if you're a buyer. So again, special rates, right? Maybe you've got an affiliate relationship and, they typically pay people 20% and you negotiated to get 35%. And maybe they regret giving you that 35%, but they're sticking to it. Now you go to sell the business and the new person's got to sign up for that affiliate. And they're like, well, I know we gave him 35, but now we only max out at 20, so we can't do it. Well, depending on how significant that revenue amount is, they may not want to transfer that, to a new person. So it's important to make sure that those types of things are going to be transferable. And some of that stuff you won't know until it's kind of getting ready time to do it. So when it's time to think about selling the business, maybe those are things that you want to look into. Contracts, agreements, they should be in writing. Handshake deals aren't really the best thing. If you've got content writers, do you have an agreement with them that says that they're transferring all ownership of the work that they've done to you? Who owns the copyright and the content? I've seen that plenty of times when we're selling a content site and the buyer's like, okay, well, where's your agreement with how did you get all of this content? Who did you pay? And where are the agreements that give you the rights to it? It's going to be important. And the larger the deal size, the more sophisticated the buyers are going to be. And the more that they're going to require these things, right? So you got to really make sure that, you're getting those things in writing, when you set that up. So the fourth pillar is documentation, right? So when somebody buys it, they're going to know there's risk, right? They want the growth, right? Then they're going to need the transferability, but you've given them all this information and they're taking your word for it at first. But okay, hey, now I'm going to make an offer based on all the things you've told me. Now I'm going to do my due diligence. That due diligence comes in the form of documentation, right? Since it's not like a physical, building or something, they're going to want to look at your website, right? They're going to want to look at potentially the code that you have written. They're going to want to see your affiliate accounts. They're going to want to see, your Mediavine account. They want to see bank statements, tax returns, documentation, right? Really important. So uh, first and foremost, you should be using some sort of sophisticated financial software, meaning like QuickBooks or Xero. I think when we all started off, we were probably all using Excel to begin with, where you're just kind of listing things. If your business is worth selling, it's probably worth doing it properly and getting a QuickBooks account, right? It can be QuickBooks Online, it can be desktop version, whatever. Um, Oftentimes it makes sense, depending on the size of the business, to hire a bookkeeper as well, right? It's going to take a lot of that kind of stuff off your plate that maybe you don't want to do anyway, and it'll be done professionally and it'll be a lot cleaner that way. Having the ability to sell your business through an SBA loan is going to increase the buyer pool by like 10x. Anytime I put out a listing for a business, one of the first questions people always ask are, can I get an SBA loan on this? So much so that like, if you look at our listings now, like the title of every business will say SBA pre-qualified if it is such, right? If it doesn't say it, 99% chance it's not going to be SBA qualified, right? Everybody wants that. And it makes it really enticing. And the reason so is that, let's say it's $1 million business. They only have to have $100,000 to $200,000 to buy $1 million business using an SBA loan to buy it. Now, the bad part for you as a seller is it takes longer, right? If somebody has cash, when they get you that LOI, they can close in 2 weeks to a month, oftentimes, right? With the SBA, it's going to take minimum 60 days, probably closer to like 90. During COVID, it's been taking even longer just because the banks got backed up with all the PPP stuff. Um, so there's risk in that because like somebody's got cash and it's going to close. Like time is the enemy of all deals. But oftentimes you can get more money from an SBA buyer because there's a lot more competition, and competition drives value, right? So it's like for us, I think we're at something like it's like 55% of our listings go at or above the asking price. And I average, I think it's like 6.6 list or 6.6 offers per listing. And when I get that, almost always when there's multiple offers, it's going to go for above the asking price, right? Because it's that competition that drives it up. So we try to price businesses at like what we consider to be like a fair multiple. And then we let competition drive it to where it's, more than fair. And when there's a lack of competition, sometimes people will come in, below that, right? So it kind of depends on how good the business is and the desirability of it. So SBA, really good if you can get that, because again, that can drive the price up significantly. Clean financials instill confidence, right? If somebody's going through your financials and they find something that's messed up, then they're going to be like, oh, I need to go through this with a fine tooth comb. And then it just gets to take a lot more effort. It's annoying. And you want to have good financials if you can. Again, bank statements, tax returns, merchant account statements, affiliate stuff, Amazon, whatever it is, however you're making your money, you want to have verifiable third-party statements for that. Always good to know your metrics, right? If anybody's watched Shark Tank, when somebody gets on there and they start asking questions and then they fumble and they don't know the numbers, like the buyers, it throws them off, right? So understand your business, understand what your KPIs are, right? Your key performance indicators, and make sure you just got a good handle on that. Again, I'm going to talk about documentation with SOPs, right? It's really important to really document all of your processes. It's going to make it so much easier when you sell the business to transition. Really important. So just make sure that you do a good job on that, because it can be the difference between you having to spend 6 months in a year helping somebody with the business versus here's how you do it. And then maybe, 40 hours over the course of a couple months of them just, asking periodic questions. So definitely do that if you can. So I hope you got some value out of everything today. Please do reach out if you have any questions. It's just chuck@quietlight.com. Happy to hop on a call, chat anytime, answer emails. The idea with Quiet Light is that we like to lead with value. And the best time to reach out to us is well before you're ready to sell the business. Always happy to sell it, but we're also happy to work with you a year, 2 years before you're ready. Don't actually charge anything for that. Again, we're just trying to lead with value so that someday when you do sell your business, you'll come back and remember us and let us help you sell it. So thank you for your time, everybody. And again, please do reach out.